It might be hard to believe now, but there was a time when Joss Whedon was practically the king of Hollywood. A talented writer and director with a string of beloved TV shows and successful blockbusters to his name, plus the nerd credentials to make him a fan favourite, the guy seemingly could do no wrong. Until he did. And it turned out he'd been doing it for quite some time without any of us realising. What followed was one of the most spectacular falls from grace that Hollywood has ever seen, and a strong candidate for another episode of Crash and Burn, the Joss Whedon story. But first, some history. Joss Whedon was born in the 1960s in New York City to parents who were both heavily involved in the arts. His father was a screenwriter and actor, and his mother an aspiring author and feminist activist, which probably explains his later focus on writing strong, well-developed female characters, and his, complicated relationship with actual women, but more on that one later. Anyway, Whedon's childhood could best be described as difficult. His parents were demanding and often verbally abusive towards him and his brothers, and their divorce left a lasting impact on him. He was often bullied at school, especially during a stint at boarding school in England, and it was here that he learned to be much more aggressive and confrontational. Keep that one in mind too, because it'll definitely be important later. Anyway, it wasn't all bad. It was during this time that he developed his passion for writing, and when he moved back to the States, he soon found himself working as a staff writer for various sitcoms like Roseanne and Parenthood. With a strong grasp of story and character and a knack for writing snappy dialogue, he soon became a popular script doctor for big 90s movies like Twister, Speed and Waterworld. But young Joss had grander plans, and while he was doing all of this, he began developing his own idea for a TV show about a high school student who hunts vampires in her spare time. That's right, I'm talking of course about Rhonda the Immortal Waitress. Gay! Okay, so the title needed a bit of work, but this rough idea would eventually go on to become Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which started life as a low-budget horror comedy starring Kristy Swanson. And well, the less said about that one, the better. But the idea was good enough to land Whedon a second chance with a TV show that launched in 1997 and would go on to become one of the biggest hits of the late 90s, winning a bunch of awards and even spawning its own spin-off, Angel. All of Whedon's creative trademarks were on full display: his complex character work, his strong focus on female empowerment, his ability to balance humour and witty dialogue with moments of crushing drama and pathos. Buffy officially put Joss Whedon on the map. Unfortunately, his next project wouldn't be quite so successful. Firefly was a kind of neo-western sci-fi series about a crew of smugglers and mercenaries caught up in an interstellar civil war. Whedon's writing was still on top form, and although it developed a strong cult following, strong competition from similar shows and a lack of network support ultimately sank it. Firefly turned out to be the right show at the wrong time and never quite broke through into mainstream success, even though it's now considered one of the best sci-fi series ever made. This is why we can't have nice things. It was a setback for sure, but Whedon emerged from it mostly unscathed and bounced back with the horror satire Cabin in the Woods. But bigger things were afoot for Joss, and in 2010 it was announced that he'd been brought in by Marvel to write and direct the first Avengers movie for their fledgling MCU. And well, I think we know how that one went. The Avengers turned out to be everything Marvel needed at the time, earning rave reviews and overwhelming audience support, and more importantly raking in $1.5 billion for the company. Almost overnight, the MCU went from a disjointed and uneven bunch of superhero movies to a global juggernaut that's still going today. Well, more or less. Whedon by now was at the height of his success, lauded as the new golden boy of Hollywood, able to turn his hand to almost anything, and most importantly, transforming the way dialogue was written for film. A process which is now referred to as Whedonization, but more on that later. Marvel were happy and so were the fans, and when it came time for the next Avengers movie, the solution was obvious. Hey there old chap, fancy doing the same thing again and making us even more money? Sure thing, Marvel. Age of Ultron would prove to be a much more challenging experience for everyone involved though. There were creative differences between Whedon and the studio right from the start, and the film struggled under the weight of so many conflicting demands, costing more but making less than its predecessor, and getting decidedly mixed reviews. Disillusioned and burned out after working in someone else's sandbox for the past 5 years, Whedon eventually parted company with Marvel afterwards. But it wouldn't be long before fate came a-knocking. While the MCU was soaring to ever greater highs, Warner's DC universe on the other hand was struggling just to get off the ground. The studio had lost confidence in Zack Snyder's vision for the franchise, and when a personal tragedy forced him to bow out of post-production for Justice League, they saw a chance to course correct. Hey Joss, you know how you did that Avengers thing for Marvel and made them a shit-zillion dollars? Any chance you could come in and do the same thing for this movie? Whedon reluctantly accepted the offer, but it was pretty obvious the film would need more than a bit of spit and polish in the editing bay. A full-scale rewrite and reshoot were what was needed, with very little time and money available for either. To his credit, Whedon threw himself into the project, doing his best to give DC their version of the Avengers, but it would turn out to be a futile effort, and Justice League would go on to become one of the biggest disasters in superhero history. It was a huge embarrassment for Whedon, but even worse news was on the way. Remember when I told you about all that childhood bullying which forced him to become much more aggressive and confrontational with people, and the feminist activist mother who inspired a complex and often difficult relationship with women? Well, all of that stuff was about to come back to bite Joss in the arse big time. It all began in July of 2020 when cyborg actor Ray Fisher accused Whedon of gross, abusive, unprofessional and completely unacceptable behaviour on the set of Justice League. Jason Momoa soon chimed in too, referencing the shitty way they were treated and that serious stuff went down. Even Gal Gadot eventually pitched in, claiming that Whedon was difficult, demanding and verbally abusive, threatening to derail her career if she didn't do what he wanted. Now, this was all bad news, but Whedon probably could have survived the fallout if the accusations were limited to this one movie. After all, a tense and difficult reshoot on a troubled film that nobody really wanted to be part of would surely put anyone in a bad mood. But if things were bad already, they were about to get a whole lot worse. In February of 2021, Charisma Carpenter launched an absolute tirade against him on social media, claiming amongst other things that he was casually cruel while working on Buffy, calling her fat, mocked her religion, repeatedly threatened to fire her, and eventually did. From there, the floodgates were opened and pretty much the entire cast of Buffy came out with similar stories, especially the women who seemed to have been particular targets for him. Michelle Trachtenberg even claimed that she had a rule on set never to be left alone in a room with Whedon. One of Firefly's writers revealed how Whedon used to boast about making female staffers cry and made a point of tearing their ideas apart with particular venom. In the space of a few months, Whedon's public image as an affable geek, a principled male feminist and a talented writer with a love of cinema was absolutely shattered. In its place was an angry, embittered bully who abused his power and made everyone around him miserable. Pretty soon, the mainstream media who used to write fawning articles about his progressive characters and positive role models turned on him with absolute vengeance. He was removed as showrunner from the HBO series The Nevers, and all of his upcoming projects and public appearances were cancelled. For all intents and purposes, his career basically ended overnight. An attempt at damage control in 2022 backfired in the worst way possible when he tried to shift the blame to the Justice League cast themselves, claiming that they were rude and difficult to work with, and that Gal Gadot just kind of misunderstood what he was saying because her English wasn't very good.
Kal-El, no!
Needless to say, it didn't do much to help his case. Whedon had gone from Hollywood's golden boy to a complete pariah, unable to find anyone willing to hire him, unable to get a single project off the grounds. In the 5 years since this firestorm erupted, he hasn't produced a single movie or TV show, and that's not likely to change anytime soon. These days, most people seem to know him for his biggest and most infamous contribution to cinema, the dreaded Whedonization of character writing, making every line of dialogue some ironic, self-deprecating punchline to a not particularly funny joke, turning every character into a snarky, sarcastic pop culture quotation machine, and draining all the drama and honesty out of every single scene. Which is funny because what they're usually pushing back against isn't Whedon's writing at all, but some inferior hack's lame attempts to replicate it. But it doesn't really matter anymore because the reputation is stuck and you'll find few people willing to stand up and defend the guy for anything these days. Unlike the Rachel Zeglers and the Brie Larsons of the world, who never really deserved their success in the first place, Whedon leaves behind him a much more complicated legacy. A man of obvious talents who did great things with his career, but also great personal flaws, whose success was ultimately undone by his own fucked up personality. His career crash and burn might not have been all that satisfying, but ultimately it was still very much self-inflicted. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Go away now.